There's a kind of ignorance that hides in plain sight and wears the mask of confidence and certainty. You've probably encountered it before. Someone who refuses to listen, rejects new ideas, speaks with absolute certainty, yet lacks true understanding. It's frustrating, isn't it? But here's the real danger. Stupidity isn't just about a lack of intelligence. It's about a mindset, a way of thinking that closes doors instead of opening them. Imagine standing at a crossroads, one path leading to growth and wisdom, the other to stagnation and ignorance. The difference between the two: it's not IQ, education, or talent. It's the ability to question, to reflect, to embrace humility. The wise person understands they don't know everything. The fool believes they already do. And in a world that constantly changes, refusing to learn is a slow form of self-destruction. The Stoics understood this well. Marcus Aurelius, one of the wisest emperors in history, once wrote, "A man can't learn what he thinks he already knows." The moment we stop questioning, we stop growing. And that's the essence of stupidity. Not lack of intelligence, but the refusal to see beyond one's limited perspective. In this video, we're going to uncover the 6 signs of a truly foolish person. These traits are not just annoying, they are obstacles to personal growth, meaningful relationships, to success. The worst part: many people don't even realize they're falling into these patterns. But once you recognize them, you gain the power to navigate around them and, most importantly, avoid them in yourself. So let's dive into the first sign. A closed mind. A closed mind is like a locked door with the key thrown away. It keeps new ideas out and traps ignorance within. It's the person who refuses to listen, the one who dismisses new perspectives before even considering them. You've seen it before. Maybe it was in a heated debate where someone stubbornly clung to their opinion despite clear evidence to the contrary. Or perhaps it was in a conversation where a person's response to a new idea was immediate rejection rather than curiosity. A closed mind isn't just unwilling to learn, it actively resists it. The Stoics understood that wisdom begins with humility. Socrates, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, famously said, "I know that I know nothing." That wasn't a declaration of ignorance, but of openness, an acknowledgement that true knowledge comes from a willingness to question, explore, to challenge one's own beliefs. A fool, on the other hand, believes they already have all the answers. They treat their opinions as absolute truths, their beliefs as unshakable facts. And in doing so, they build walls around their mind, ensuring they never grow beyond their current state. But a closed mind is more than just stubbornness. It breeds arrogance, isolation, and stagnation. The person who refuses to listen not only limits themselves, but also drives others away. No one enjoys talking to someone who never considers another viewpoint, who shuts down discussions before they even begin. Relationships suffer, opportunities slip away, and personal growth becomes impossible. Imagine a traveler who refuses to take a different road, insisting their path is the only one, even when it leads them straight to a dead end. That is the fate of a closed mind. The danger isn't just in rejecting knowledge, but in the illusion of knowing. The fool doesn't just avoid learning. They think they've already learned enough. They confuse confidence with wisdom, mistaking their certainty for truth. But the world doesn't stand still. Life evolves, knowledge expands, and those who refuse to adapt are left behind. The wise person knows that every conversation, every challenge, every new idea is an opportunity to grow. They listen, they consider, and they remain open to change. If you recognize this trait in someone, or even in yourself, understand that the first step toward wisdom is simple. Question what you think you know. Because the moment you stop learning, you stop truly living. 2. Constant blaming. Blaming others is one of the easiest things to do. It requires no effort, no self-reflection, no responsibility, just an outstretched finger pointing at someone else. The weather, the economy, bad luck, an unfair boss, a difficult childhood, there's always something or someone to blame. And while this may provide temporary relief, it leads to a life of stagnation, frustration, and bitterness. Because the truth is, the more you blame, the less control you have. The Stoics understood this well. They taught us that while we can't control everything that happens to us, we can always control how we respond. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of the greatest Stoic philosophers, could have spent his life blaming his circumstances. Instead, he chose to focus on his actions, his thoughts, and his growth. He understood that blaming others is like giving them the keys to your life. It places your happiness, your success, and your sense of peace in someone else's hands. A person who constantly blames others is, in many ways, a prisoner of their mindset. Every setback becomes someone else's fault, and every failure is the result of external forces. They never stop to ask the most important question: what can I do to change this? Instead of taking action, they waste energy complaining. Instead of learning from their mistakes, they deny their role in them. Instead of growing stronger, they become weaker, trapped in a cycle of frustration and helplessness. But there's something even more dangerous about constant blaming. It destroys relationships. No one enjoys being around someone who refuses to take responsibility. Over time, this habit creates resentment, erodes trust, and pushes people away. Friends grow tired of hearing excuses, colleagues lose patience, and opportunities quietly disappear. While the one who blames others may think they are justifying their failures, they are showcasing their inability to take control of their own life. The difference between a strong person and a weak one isn't their circumstances, it's their mindset. Strong people face challenges head-on. They acknowledge when they've made mistakes, learn from them, and move forward. Weak people, on the other hand, look for someone to blame, hoping that by shifting the burden, they can avoid the weight of responsibility. But responsibility isn't a burden, it's power. The moment you stop blaming, you take your life back into your own hands. If you recognize this habit in yourself or others, understand this: every excuse you make is a chain that keeps you stuck. Every time you blame someone else, you give away a piece of your freedom, and the only way to break free is to own your actions, your choices, and your future. The world will always be unfair. There will always be difficulties, but your response, that's entirely up to you. 3. Arrogance. Arrogance is a silent destroyer. It builds walls where there should be bridges, turns allies into enemies, and blinds a person to their faults. It is the illusion of knowledge, the false belief that one has nothing left to learn. A truly wise person remains a student of life, but an arrogant person believes they have already mastered it, and that is where their downfall begins. The Stoics warned against arrogance because it is the enemy of growth. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Roman emperors and a devoted Stoic, constantly reminded himself to stay humble, question his assumptions, and listen more than he spoke. Despite ruling an empire, he understood that the moment you believe you have all the answers, you stop learning. And when you stop learning, you stop improving. Arrogance is often mistaken for confidence, but they are not the same. Confidence comes from competence, knowing you have put in the effort to develop a skill, to understand a subject, or to master a challenge. Arrogance, on the other hand, is empty. It is built on ego, insecurity, and the desperate need to appear superior. A confident person remains open to correction, but an arrogant person resents it. A confident person values wisdom, but an arrogant person only values being right. This mindset creates a dangerous cycle. Arrogant people surround themselves with those who feed their delusion, pushing away anyone who dares to challenge them. They ignore feedback, dismiss opposing viewpoints, and refuse to acknowledge their mistakes. The more they do this, the more fragile they become, because deep down, arrogance is not strength. It is fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of appearing weak, fear of facing the truth that they are not as great as they pretend to be. And yet, the greatest thinkers, leaders, and philosophers throughout history have all shared one trait: humility. They understood that wisdom is not about proving how much you know, but about realizing how much you still have to learn. Socrates, one of the wisest men in history, famously said, "I know that I know nothing." This wasn't self-deprecation. It was the foundation of his wisdom. The moment you accept that you do not have all the answers is the moment you become capable of finding them. If you recognize arrogance in yourself, ask, when was the last time I truly listened? When was the last time I admitted I was wrong? When was the last time I sought to learn instead of to prove? The greatest danger of arrogance is that it keeps a person trapped in their illusion. They may believe they are strong, but in reality, they are standing on a foundation of sand. And when the storm comes, when they are truly tested, they will realize too late that they have built nothing at all. 4. Lack of empathy. Lack of empathy is a quiet force that erodes relationships, isolates individuals, and blinds people to the suffering of others. It is not always loud or aggressive. It often operates in silence, in indifference, in the unwillingness to understand another person's pain. A person without empathy may not intend to harm others, but by failing to see beyond themselves, they do so anyway. The Stoics believed that we are all interconnected and that our duty as human beings is not just to ourselves, but to the greater whole. When someone lacks empathy, they fail in this duty. Empathy is the ability to step outside of yourself and into someone else's reality. It is the bridge between human experiences, allowing us to connect, to help, and to grow together. But when a person refuses to walk that bridge, they remain trapped in their narrow world. They dismiss others' struggles, mock their emotions, and convince themselves that kindness is a weakness. In truth, it is the lack of empathy that reveals true weakness, because it shows an inability to understand the most fundamental aspect of being human, the ability to care. Many people mistake a lack of empathy for strength. They believe that detachment makes them powerful, and that being cold makes them untouchable. But a person without empathy is not strong. They are alone. They push people away, build walls instead of bonds, and eventually find themselves surrounded not by allies, but by emptiness. No one trusts them, no one confides in them. And when they fall, because everyone at some point faces hardship, there is no one left to catch them. Stoicism teaches us not to be ruled by emotions, but it never tells us to reject them completely. Marcus Aurelius, despite being one of the most disciplined thinkers in history, often wrote about the importance of kindness. He understood that strength is not about shutting others out, but about knowing when to let them in. A person who lacks empathy may see others as obstacles, competitors, or burdens. A wise person sees them as fellow travelers on the same unpredictable journey of life. But lack of empathy does not always come from malice. Sometimes it is a defense mechanism, a way to avoid vulnerability. If you do not care, you cannot be hurt. If you do not connect, you cannot be abandoned. But in protecting themselves from pain, these people also shut themselves off from joy, from love, from the very things that give life meaning. They build a fortress so strong that nothing can touch them, not even warmth. The way forward is simple, yet difficult. It requires a shift in perspective and a willingness to see beyond oneself. It requires listening, truly listening, instead of waiting for your turn to speak. It requires recognizing that every person you meet is fighting a battle you do not see. And most of all, it requires understanding that in lifting others up, we do not lose strength, we gain it. True wisdom is not in isolation, but in connection, and without empathy, that connection is impossible. 5. Fear of change. Fear of change is a silent enemy that keeps people trapped in cycles of mediocrity, limiting their growth and potential. It is the invisible chain that holds someone back, even when a better life is just on the other side of discomfort. Those who fear change cling to the familiar, even when it no longer serves them. They convince themselves that stability is the same as happiness and that avoiding the unknown will somehow protect them from failure. But in truth, avoiding change is the surest path to stagnation. Stoicism teaches us that everything in life is impermanent. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that nothing stays the same. Our circumstances, our fortunes, and even our very bodies are in a constant state of transformation. To fear change is to fear life itself. Yet many people resist it, preferring the illusion of control over the reality of uncertainty. They stay in situations that make them unhappy, not because they believe things will improve, but because they are too afraid to face what lies beyond their comfort zone. The fear of change often disguises itself as logic. People tell themselves that now is not the right time, that they need more preparation, and that they must wait for perfect conditions. But perfection never comes. Life moves forward whether we are ready or not, and those who refuse to move with it eventually find themselves left behind. A person who fears change will find endless excuses to stay in place, yet deep down, they know they are merely delaying the inevitable. Change is not always easy. It can be painful, uncomfortable, and filled with uncertainty. But growth is impossible without it. The greatest figures in history, philosophers, leaders, inventors, did not achieve greatness by clinging to the past. They embraced the unknown, took risks, and accepted that failure was not an end, but a necessary step towards success. The Stoics understood that the only thing we truly control is our mindset. We cannot stop change from happening, but we can decide how we respond to it. Many people fear change because they equate it with loss. Leaving behind an old identity, an old way of thinking, or an old way of living feels like losing a part of themselves. But what they fail to see is that transformation is not about losing, it is about becoming. When a snake sheds its skin, it does not grieve for what it has left behind. It moves forward, lighter, stronger, and renewed. The same applies to people. Growth requires shedding old habits, outdated beliefs, and limiting mindsets. It requires stepping into the unknown with the understanding that the discomfort of today is the strength of tomorrow. Those who resist change may feel safe, but in reality, they are only delaying their progress. The world will change with or without them. Time does not wait for hesitation. The Stoics knew that resisting reality only leads to suffering, while accepting and adapting to it brings peace. The wise do not fight change, they welcome it. They do not see the unknown as a threat, but as an opportunity. They understand that life is not meant to be lived in repetition, but in evolution. The moment a person stops fearing change, they reclaim their power. They realize that every new challenge is a doorway to something greater. They stop clinging to what was and start embracing what could be. They become, at last, the masters of their fate. 6. Talking more than listening. Talking more than listening is a sign of an undisciplined mind, one that prioritizes its voice over wisdom. Words spill out like an overflowing cup, leaving no room for understanding and no space for reflection. A person who talks too much is not engaged in conversation, they are engaged in performance. They do not seek truth, only validation. They speak not to learn, but to be heard. And in doing so, they miss the essence of human connection. Stoicism teaches that wisdom begins with silence. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of the greatest Stoic philosophers, said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." This simple truth is often ignored by those who are more concerned with being right than with being wise. A person who dominates conversations, who interrupts, who fills every pause with their thoughts, reveals their insecurity. They mistake noise for knowledge and volume for value. But true wisdom does not need to announce itself. It is found in observation, in contemplation, in the quiet moments between words. People who talk excessively are often disconnected from reality. They fail to notice the reactions of others, the shifting body language, and the subtle cues that indicate understanding or disagreement. They become trapped in their narratives, convinced that their perspective is the only one that matters. But wisdom is not built on monologues, it is built on dialogue. A mind that refuses to listen is a mind that refuses to grow. Talking more than listening is also a sign of unchecked ego. The desire to be the loudest voice in the room stems from a need for validation, a hunger to be seen as important. But the most influential people in history, the true thinkers, the great leaders, were not those who filled the air with endless words, but those who listened, processed, and responded with clarity. Socrates, known for his relentless questioning, was revered not for his speeches, but for his ability to draw out deeper truths from those around him. He understood that real learning comes not from proclaiming what you know, but from seeking what you do not. In modern times, the tendency to talk too much has only grown stronger. Social media rewards constant expression, creating a world where people share every thought without reflection. Conversations become competitions, with everyone trying to outshine the other. The art of listening, of truly hearing someone without preparing a response, is slowly disappearing. But those who wish to be wise must resist this urge. They must learn to hold back their words, to absorb, to reflect. Silence is not weakness, it is power. The person who listens more than they speak gains insight that others miss. They notice details, they understand motives, and they see beyond the surface. They do not waste words, but when they do speak, their words carry weight. A person who talks too much often believes they are in control, but in reality, they are exposing themselves. They reveal their thoughts, their insecurities, their lack of discipline. They speak without restraint, giving away their power. But the one who listens, who waits, who chooses their words with intention, holds influence. The Stoics understood that restraint in speech is a form of self-mastery. Words should be tools, not weapons. They should serve a purpose, not be thrown carelessly into the wind. The wise person speaks when necessary, but more importantly, they listen. Because in listening, they gain the one thing the foolish person never will: understanding. Wisdom is not found in how much we say, but in how well we understand. The signs of foolishness, closed-mindedness, blame, arrogance, lack of empathy, fear of change, and talking more than listening are not just flaws in others. They are dangers that can reside within us if we are not vigilant. It is easy to point at the foolishness of the world, to criticize the ignorance of others, but the true Stoic turns inward first. Are we truly open to new ideas, or do we cling to old beliefs? Do we take responsibility, or do we find comfort in blaming others? Do we carry arrogance masked as confidence? Do we listen, or are we simply waiting for our turn to speak? Recognizing these traits in others is important, but recognizing them in ourselves is essential. The world is filled with distractions and empty noise. with people who speak without thinking and act without wisdom, but we are not bound to follow that path. The Stoic chooses self-awareness over self-deception, discipline over indulgence, and wisdom over vanity. True strength does not come from being the loudest voice in the room, but from having the clarity to know when to speak and when to remain silent. If we wish to rise above the noise, we must train our minds to seek truth, not comfort. We must welcome challenge, not run from it. We must listen, reflect, and grow. A foolish person remains stagnant, locked in their illusions. A wise person embraces change, knowing that growth is the only path to true wisdom. And so, as we walk forward, let us choose to be better. Let us choose thoughtfulness over impulse, humility over arrogance, and action over empty words. Because in the end, wisdom is not about knowing everything. It is about having the courage to question, learn, and evolve.